Good day, children. So today we move on to the second part of Nelson Mandela Long Walk to Freedom. Before we move on to the lesson, let's take a quick recap of what happened in part 1. In the first part, we saw swearing in of the first democratic non-racial government led by Nelson Mandela, and the ceremony was attended by dignitaries and leaders from various nations. And we also get to see the speech delivered by Mandela, and he stresses how that a man can never be oppressed by another. So that was part 1. Now let's move on to part 2, starting from page number 19. A few moments later, we all lifted our eyes in awe as a spectacular array of South African jets, helicopters and troop carriers rode in perfect formation over the Union buildings. So after some time, after the speech and after some time, they all saw a very spectacular array or an impressive display, a colorful and attractive display of the South African jets, the helicopters and the troop carriers which rode in perfect formation. So there was a unity in the way, there was a perfect formation formed by these jets and helicopters and the troop carriers, and they flew over the Union buildings. Now this you can think about our Republic Day in our country, where we have the different states coming in with a lot of different tableaus, and at the same time we can also see how the military performs a jet display. This is something similar. It was not only a display of pinpoint precision and military force, but a demonstration of the military's loyalty to democracy, to a new government that had been freely and fairly elected. So he says how it was not just a display which had a pinpoint precision or which was so perfect by the military force, but it was a demonstration or a show by the military to show their loyalty towards the democratic government that was formed, to the democracy, to a new government that had been freely and fairly elected by the people. Only moments before, the highest generals of the South African Defence Force and police, their chests bedecked with ribbons and medals from days gone by, saluted me and pledged their loyalty. So he says how it was just few moments before all these highest generals of the South African Defence Force and the police, all their chests bedecked with ribbons. Bedecked is basically all their chest was adorned with ribbons and medals from the days that had gone by, and they saluted him and pledged their loyalty to him. I was not unmindful of the fact that not so many years before they would not have saluted but arrested me. So he says that he's aware or he's conscious of the fact that some few years before, these same military generals and the police would not have saluted him, but they would have arrested him for being who he was, because he was a freedom fighter. Now that they have won the freedom, the same police officials and the military generals are saluting him and showing him their loyalty. Finally, a chevron of Impala jets left a smoke trail of the black, red, green, blue and gold of the new South African flag. So after all this, there was a display by the Impala jets, in the shape of a V. The chevron means it's the pattern in the sky formed in the shape of the letter V, and these formation had as the jets passed on, they left a trail of smoke which had the colors black, red, green, blue and gold. All these colors represent the colors on the South African flag. The day was symbolized for me by the playing of our two national anthems and the vision of whites singing Nkosi Sikelel Afrika and blacks singing Die Stem, the old anthem of the Republic. So he speaks on how the day was also symbolic for him when they played two national anthems. On the same day, two national anthems were played, and he said it was a vision to watch. It was a vision of the whites singing Nkosi Sikelel Afrika, which is the national anthem of the Africans, and the blacks who was singing Die Stem, which was the white national anthem, and it was also the old anthem of the Republic during the white supremacy. Although that day neither group knew the lyrics of the anthem they once despised, they would soon know the words by heart. So he says how on that particular day both the groups were not aware of the lyrics of the anthem. That is what they were not aware that the lyrics of these anthem that they had once despised, or where once they had a very low opinion about, they will soon know these lyrics by heart. They will know the words of these national anthem by heart. On the day of the inauguration, I was overwhelmed with a sense of history. He says how he was overcome, or there was a sense of history brought into his mind. In the first decade of the 20th century, a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War and before my own birth, the white-skinned people of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned peoples of their own land. So he says how in the first decade of the 20th century, that is the beginning of the 20th century, it was a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War. Now, Anglo-Boer War is the war that was fought between the whites and two states of South Africa. Okay, it was known as the Boer War. They were from the Boer part of the country. Okay, so it was a war fought between the whites and the Boers, and it was even before the birth of Mandela. And he says how the white-skinned peoples of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination. So he says how these white people they sorted out their differences after all the war and everything. He sorted out their differences with the blacks, and they established a system of racial domination, that is where they will be ruling the country. It was a racial domination against the dark-skinned peoples of their own land. So they decided, or they established a system where they will rule the blacks. The structure they created formed the basis of one of the harshest, most inhuman societies of the world has ever known. So he says this particular structure that was created by the whites, it was one of the harshest and it was the most inhuman society that the world had ever known. So now in the last decade of the 20th century and my own 8th decade as a man, that system had been overturned forever and replaced by one that recognized the rights and freedom of all peoples regardless of the color of their skin. So he speaks how in the last decade, that is now in the beginning of the decade is where they saw the racial discrimination or the racial domination being established in the country, and now in the last decade of the 20th century for Mandela it was the 8th decade as a man, and he says how this particular system was overturned forever and it was replaced by a system which recognized the rights and freedom of all the people regardless of their color of their skin. Okay, now that day had come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. So he speaks about how on that particular day, it is a day where the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of people, people who suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. And he says he thinks about all those people who sacrificed their life fighting for the freedom of the country. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. So he says how he felt on that particular day, on the day of the inauguration, he felt that almost like all the other days, it was simply that particular day, it was simply the sum of all those African patriots, all those freedom fighters who had gone before him. He remembers them. That long and noble line ended and now began again with me. So he says how that particular noble line of patriots had ended, and now it is going to start with him. I was pained that I was not able to thank them and that they were not able to see what their sacrifices had wrought. So he says how he feels so much of pain to not able to thank those people who had sacrificed their life for the country, and he is also sad and upset that they won't be able to see what their sacrifices had done or achieved for the nation. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. All of us will spend many years, if not generations, recovering from that profound hurt. So he says how the policy of apartheid had created a very long-lasting wound in the country and on the people. And he says how they will all have to spend many years, if not generations, probably many years to recover from that particular deep and strong hurt that was inflicted on them. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another unintended effect, and that was that it produced the Oliver Tambos, the Walter Sisselers, the Chief Luthulus, the Yusuf Dadus, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Sobukwees of our time, men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom and generosity that their like many may never be known again. So he talks about all those leaders who had gone before him. So he speaks how these decades of oppression and brutality had an unintended effect, and it produced men of extraordinary courage. Those men, he names few of them. He names Oliver Tambos, Walter Sisselers, Chief Luthulus, Yusuf Dadus, Bram Fishers, Robert Sobukwees. Okay, he names few of them, and he says that all these men were of extraordinary courage and wisdom and generosity that people like them will never be known again. Perhaps it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. So he says how it requires that much amount of oppression to create such height of character. So it is the amount of oppression or the deepness of oppression created a height in the character. My country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath its soil, but I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. So he says how his country is rich in minerals and gems that lies beneath the soil, but he says how he has always known that the greatest wealth of the country is in its people, is the people of that nation, and they are finer and truer than the purest diamonds that you can find on the land. It is from these comrades in the struggle that I learned the meaning of courage. So he says how he learned the meaning of courage from these comrades who were part of the struggle. Time and again, I have seen men and women risk and give their lives for an idea. So he says how he has seen all the men and women who risked and gave up their life for an idea. That is, here it is the idea of freedom. I have seen men stand up to attacks and torture without breaking, showing a strength and resilience that defies the imagination. So he says how he has seen men stand up to the attacks and torture of these dominating whites without breaking without breaking their courage and showing the strength and the resilience or the ability to deal with any kind of hardship and recover from its effect. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear but the triumph over it. So he says how he learned that courage does not mean the absence of fear. It does not mean that there is no fear, but it is the triumph over it or the victory over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. He says that the brave man is not the one who does not feel afraid, but it is the man who can conquer the fear within oneself. No one is born hating another person, because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. So he says how no man is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. He says that people must learn to hate. You're not born knowing that you have to hate another person. Okay, so he says that you learn to hate someone, and if you can learn to hate, then you can also be taught how to love. And he says that love comes more naturally to a human heart than its opposite, which is to hate. Even in the grimmest times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second, but it was enough to reassure me and keep me going. So he says that even in the grimmest times in prison, that is the darkest of time in the prison, when his comrades and he were pushed to their limits, which means they were pushed to that last point in their body to bear the pain, he could see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards. So he could see just a shine or a note of humanity in one of the guards, and perhaps it might be seen only for a second, but that was enough to reassure him and keep him going or moving forward to bear that pain. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. So he says how man's goodness is like a flame of fire which can be hidden. You can hide that goodness or that flame in you, but it can never be extinguished or put off. You cannot put off that fire or that flame of goodness in a man. So with this, we come to the end of part 2. Now, I would like you to answer question 1 on page number 21, oral comprehension check. Question 1 in your notebook. I'll read out the question. What do the military generals do? How has their attitude changed and why? So do answer the question into your notebook. Thank you, children. Have a good